Hey, so chapter 8 is all about student voice, student choice, and basically improving those individual skills. So, a lot of times we will run into, and I see this all the time in the learned helplessness, or students purposely, now I'm knowing it, it's also students trying to look like a student, where they are asking the teacher for help, but they don't really need help. They just are, one, too lazy to get the answer, or two, trying to look like a good student by being engaged. So they're trying to engage in that student teacher stereotypical role, like we had talked about previously, or it's all about them just trying to like they're not confident in their skills because no one's built up their confidence. So one of the things about thinking classrooms is they really require student independence and the ability to think for oneself. And so in order to make that happen, sometimes we have to encourage that. So for example, giving student choice or student voice and allowing students to kind of run in their own direction, I think especially in those first couple of days really sets the tone. So for example, I was talking about this with another science teacher the other day, and we were talking about how do you talk about, like, for example, we talk about different behaviors of sound, for example, like reflection, refraction, diffraction. So, how do you have that happen in more of an open ended way? Well, instead of saying, like, name me the differences between the two, you could say, like, I can hear the teacher across the hallway. What properties of sound allow me to be able to hear them across the hallway, even though I'm not in the classroom with them? So, obviously, that path has to travel through the hallway, and how the students go about solving that problem is totally up to them. So, there's like a science context where something that typically was a very prescribed, like here's a lesson and that kind of stuff, you can still give those resources to them, but you can also open it up in a bigger way. And so, giving student choice and how they go about solving a problem. And also, like, I always have buckets of tools around the classroom. Now, with COVID, it doesn't work as well. You can still do it. I just have like a dumping bucket. So instead of them putting it back, they put it into like the quarantine bucket. But around the classroom, I'll always have available like rulers, calculators, pencils, pens, like stuff you would normally forget. I'll always have big whiteboards available. I'll always have string available. And I always will like open up the cupboard. So if we're doing a lab or just doing an activity where I feel like in this case, maybe they want string to kind of map how the sound is moving, then I'll make sure the string cupboard's open so they can see it. And the measuring tape is out so they can do measurements if they wanted to measure. If it's something with speed or something like that, I'll always make sure I have the door to the lab bench with all the carts open so kids can run over and grab carts or force meters or whatever they need. So I think that having that, instead of having like the lab benches are closed, so then if a kid wants to investigate using something hands-on, they can, or if they just want to like break it down and do it in like a mapping style, they can do it that way too. So I think that it's all about giving students choice and student voice to figure stuff out is really important, especially with a thinking classroom. The other thing they were talking about in this chapter was allowing knowledge to move between groups and having teachers facilitate that movement on purpose. So, for example, instead of when like a group is done and you can see them kind of just standing around doing nothing, you can say to them, for example, like, you have the same answer as that group, but your solutions are totally different. Why don't you figure out where the similarities and differences are between your approaches? And then the two groups can kind of come together and figure out and kind of share that knowledge. Or you can say, you have this number and that group has this number, and one group is right. Which one is it? And then they have to kind of problem solve or figure it out. Or if a group is stuck, instead of you giving them a hint on where to go next, you could say, you know what? That group over there has a strategy that's similar to yours. They might be able to help you out based off of how you started out, and then have them go to that other group and get that knowledge sharing. And so that knowledge flow amongst groups, if you kind of organically grow it, then kids will automatically start trying to do that later. You'll get rid of kids like trying to shield off their work and being like all protective, like, no, don't look at my work. And you'll also get just like students independently. And if you've done it right, I like to say that I get bored by the end of the year. So the early on in the year, I do a lot of like prompting and coaching and like, why don't you try this? Well, why don't you pick up this piece of equipment? Or the carts are over there if you wanted to try that out. And or the whiteboards are back there if you want to grab one to work on it. And so just pushing those little things. And then by the end of the year, I like start something, and then I basically stand around and wait to see if someone has a question or if I need to jump in. But I actually spend most of the time just observing the groups. And I like to say I'm bored at that point because no one needs me, which is actually means you're doing something right, because you want the class to be in a space where that knowledge sharing is happening and they're working independently and they don't need you anymore.